Greetings, Chummer! Welcome back as we continue our marathon of recaps through the first half of Season 3. Next up on our list is the recap for Season 3, Episode 4, the actual liquidation sale part. After being forcefully drawn into the singularity created by S3Ep4-6, Lancelot and Boblin found themselves hurtling through astral space as echoes of the past flash by. Disoriented by the speed and direction of their travel, Lance reaches out to try and anchor himself. Instead, he reaches inside one of these visions, the Neon Knights heist at Martha's gift mist exchange, and manages to tear free a barrel of bliss from the back room. The speed increases as visions from their time in the Boblin Cave race past. Lance, once again, reaches beyond the veil and wrenches Sir Bedivere's flaming sword from the timeline. The timeline becomes unstable as their speed increases again. Lancelot, sensing that this is his last chance to escape, catches sight of a small boat sailing through the threads of time. With all his strength, he pulls himself and Boblin onto the boat as time resumes its regular forward pace. The pair crumple to the floor of the boat and slowly regain their composure. Lancelot is completely unfamiliar with his surroundings and begins to wonder where the SCP facility went. Boblin, however, recognizes this place almost instantly as he draws Lance's attention to the window. Before them, enshrined by the flickering light of a raucous party, is the Delilah, whole once again. Boblin is taken aback by the sight and tries to assert that possibly they were able to rebuild it after it sank all those weeks ago. Lance, confused by Boblin's musings, decides to call Arthur on his comlink. The call goes through as a very confused Arthur asks who Lance was and how he got his number. At this moment, Boblin spots Arthur, Gawain, Merlin, and Percy crossing the deck, wearing the same clothes they did the night of the Delilah incident. However, Lance and Boblin don't have time to process this revelation, as several staff members have begun to approach their boat for an inspection. While the party was infiltrating the SCP facility, Gawain spent his alone time recovering and exploring the warehouse. As someone with a sizable interest in Arthurian lore, Gawain decided to take advantage of the space to satisfy his curiosity that had been pushed to the side up until recently. His first thought was to find the throne room, and he could find no better indication of such a place than the large pair of barred iron doors. In the quiet, Gawain could hear echoes of the knights of old as he walked down the vaulted stone hall. Whispers, laughter, and the sound of armored figures running brushed past his ears before he finally stood before the large iron doors. Expecting to hear more of the same, Gawain pressed his ear against the cold iron. Beyond, he heard a muffled, low growl and thundering steps that almost drowned out the voice of King Arthur shouting out to Merlin for help. This memory was quickly interrupted by a cutting, clear, female voice that hissed, "I can smell you. Go ahead. Knock. Or don't. I'm sure we shall meet each other very soon, Watcher." The voice introduces herself as she that has waited, the eldest sister, and the queen, to which he responds that she's only a mere voice behind a door, and then promptly retreats to explore a different part of the keep. After exploring, Gawain finds that Arthur, Percy, and Merlin have returned to the keep and are arguing over how to extract Lancelot and Boblin from the SCP facility. Arthur is concerned that Percy left both of them in Meatspace to handle SCP-10119 by themselves, but she holds that they need to stick to the escape plan and not throw in any unnecessary variables. Merlin echoes Arthur's concern, and eventually they convince Percy to go back into Meatspace to check on the two stragglers. Percy shifts herself out of the warehouse and lands on the floor next to Boblin, who quickly explains the situation in hushed tones. Outside, the Delilah staff had overheard the pair arguing and have begun to slowly approach, guns raised. Percy freezes momentarily as Boblin's revelation sinks in, before she quickly shifts everyone back inside the warehouse. Back inside, she grabs Arthur and, with little explanation, brings him onto the boat. After receiving a hurried brief on the situation from Percy, she vanishes, leaving Arthur to head up the aquatic escape. In the warehouse, Lancelot explains the SCP-10119 singularity to the group and breaks the news that they have, in fact, traveled back in time to February 2nd, 2090. Boblin and Percy are shaken by this. But Merlin is surprisingly optimistic, seeing this as an opportunity to take care of some unfinished business and follow up on leads they were unable to pursue the first time around. She asserts that she's seen enough time travel movies to know that as long as they avoid their former selves and pick out a good disguise, they should be fine. With Gwain's support, the rest of the party reluctantly agrees. Merlin excitedly runs to the library to find disguises for the group, while Percy tries to check in with Arthur. Being that Arthur is part squid, it is a simple task for him to silently slip into the ocean unnoticed. However, this stealth was short-lived. After making it into the water, Arthur decided to take control of the boat using Puppeteer and send it careening away from the Delilah, launching several members of the staff into the water right next to him. Before he could swim away, the staff regained their composure and started to pursue Arthur. A brief scuffle ensues, and with his adversaries closing in, Arthur manages to slip out of a grapple and plant Excalibur as a kind of EMP mine before swimming out of their reach and into the darkness. After dodging the Delilah personnel, Arthur navigated the blind spots of several subaquatic surveillance drones and hoisted himself up onto the lowest level of the ship itself. Once aboard, he signals Percy to sub in order to find somewhere quiet that they could reconvene and meet space. Eventually, with the party all together and properly disguised, Arthur talks the party through a general timeline of the Delilah party so they can divide the team up in a way where they're able to avoid their former selves. However, their planning session is interrupted when Ulysses calls Arthur out of hiding. Arthur tentatively approaches his grandfather, as Ulysses explains that he had to do damage control when the Delilah staff caught wind of a squid monster attacking the ship. Lance joins Arthur as backup just before Arthur leans in and whispers Chivalry is Dead's plan to attack the Delilah into Ulysses' ear. Intrigued by this warning, Ulysses invites the pair up to a private room on the sun deck. The party, effectively split, decides to split further. Gwain and Boblin head to the bar to make some new contacts, while Merlin and Percy head to the poker room to keep an eye on Shay. Had enough yet? Here's the recap for Season 3, Episode 5, Don't Rock the Boat. As Arthur and Lancelot follow closely behind, Ulysses leads the pair up past the sun deck and into the private suites. He doesn't knock on the set of heavy wooden doors before them. Rather, he gives a silent signal to his guards to stand watch before slamming the doors open with his giant claw. Shocked by his entrance, Ephraim, one of Chivalry is Dead's executives, and his entourage tense as Ulysses quickly closes the distance between them. Ulysses' voice thunders across the garishly decorated room, declaring that he's come to talk about Ephraim's betrayal. Arthur and Lance exchange worried looks before readying their weapons for a potential fight. At the doors of the poker room, Merlin and Percy barely convince the bouncer that they are there by Boblin's invitation. Boblin, of the past, rolls his eyes at the pair, but waves them over anyway. As they settle into their seats, Merlin messages the group that they've got eyes on Shay, before focusing her attention on the subtleties of the game. Boblin demonstrates that at the beginning of each hand, the person who starts will voice either an inquiry for work or information that is needed or offered to the group. The amount of money exchanged is coded based on a ranked system, bronze as hundreds, silver as thousands, and gold as tens of thousands. As the hand progresses, the other people at the table will either check if they're interested, raise to indicate an offer or counteroffer, or fold if they wish to pass on the deal. After getting a hang of the system, Percy tries to offer her services as a thief, but fumbles in her attempt to do so in a coded fashion. Merlin, however, excels when her turn comes up, and she presses Boblin and Sir Gallard for more information on the wolf. Gallard offers to help her with her rematch and informs her that the wolf and his associates are currently on board. Merlin declines to commit to a full deal for their information. However, Gallard points her towards another table who might be able to provide her with more details for the next hand. Back in the executive suite, Ulysses pressures Arthur to share the details of Ephraim's betrayal with the entire group. Sensing that combat is about to break out, Lancelot braces the Tetsubo in front of Arthur. Arthur steels himself and reveals what he knows about their plan. In response, Ulysses hurls one of the couches toward Ephraim, and the group descends into chaos. As Arthur reforms Excalibur, Lance uses one of Hook and Eye's gadgets to cut and retrieve a bandolier of grenades from around the chest of one of the mercenaries. Unfortunately, the device glitches and sends the grenades soaring towards Arthur, Lance, and Ulysses. In a desperate attempt to mitigate the damage, Lance hits the bandolier with his tetsubo and sends it careening off towards the room's wet bar. The mercenaries hardly see the attack coming, as the group is buffeted by a series of explosions. Following Gallard's direction, Merlin leads Percy towards a new table where a Draco-form woman with feathered hair and a man with a mechanical eye level calculating looks at the two of them. The man, who introduces himself as Graham from Penumbra, interrupts Merlin's initial inquiry to note that they would take this first round to introduce themselves before getting down to business. The woman, who calls herself Miss S, says she's a brand representative looking to scout out new opportunities and that she'd be interested in an exchange of goods and services. Hearing this, Percy tenses as she realizes that the woman is giving her a knowing look. Merlin catches on to this development and uses her inquiry to tell Miss S that she and Percy would be happy to get rid of some pests for her in exchange for information on Merlin's pest. Graham seems interested in this deal as well, but hesitates in response to Merlin's high price tag. He doesn't know Percy by reputation, or Silk rather, and wants proof of her skills. However, he does let slip that he has information on the wolf. The woman, on the other hand, knows of Silk and is eager to pay Merlin's price for her pest control services. As the grenades explode, Arthur and Lancelot are knocked to the ground. Thankfully, Lance is able to reflect most of the damage off of him and Arthur with his giant shield. However, the sound of the explosion deafens them both temporarily. One of the mercenaries, an orc named Garp, takes advantage of the smokescreen to pierce Lance in the side with an electric spear. The shock causes Lance's knees to buckle as his vision fades to black. Deafened and partially blind, Arthur wrests himself from underneath Lance's unconscious form and attempts to force him awake. Ulysses, emboldened by the chaos, hoists one of Ephraim's entourage into the air, yelling, "You thought I wouldn't find out? That surprising me would make a difference? What happens when the others find out?" To which the man reveals, with a reptilian grin, that Ulysses was the only executive excluded from their plan, meaning that his use has come to an end. The smoke is pierced by a hail of gunfire from the other mercenaries, but Ulysses continues, exclaiming that Chivalry is dead would not be able to function without the foundation and resources that he has provided them. Back at the poker table, Miss S waits expectantly for Merlin to accept her offer. Merlin uses her sub-vocal mic to ask Percy if she's willing to go through with the deal. Percy signals Merlin to go ahead, but before they can officially accept, Graham asks if they can pause the game so that he can talk to his boss. He states that he would be willing to raise his bid significantly if Percy can prove she is who she said she is. The discussion falls silent as Graham makes his way over to the head table and, to Percy's horror, toward Shay. Season 3, Episode 6, King of Diamonds. As the smoke clears in the executive suite, Lancelot wakes up to find that he and Arthur are surrounded. The orc, Garp, looms above him, still holding the spear that is piercing Lance's shoulder. Angered by the situation, Lance grips the spear tighter and uses it as the point of a compass and runs a circle around Garp. The mercenary is momentarily confused by this tactic until he sees the glowing plasma disc that erupts from Lance's gauntlet. Bathed in the light of the plasma disc, Garp sees a moment too late that Lance has carved a perfect circle in the floor under his feet before he plummets into the darkness. On the other side of combat, Arthur intercepts a notice from Snowblind, the ship's security ice, that more staff are on the way. However, the emergency notice disappears as quickly as it came and is replaced by strobing disco lights. Before Arthur can finish signaling Lance, the Chivalry mercs spray suppressive fire over the room, pinning him to the ground. Ulysses smoothly switches from strangling one man to firing his hand cannon at Ephraim, yelling that, "The longer you make this go on, the more painful it will be." In response, Ephraim uses a cybernetic arm augmentation to snare the missile and fling it across the room. Arthur, noticing all the shrapnel on the floor, converts Excalibur into the railgun and prepares his own round of suppressive fire against Ephraim. The initial hits bounce off as they did before, but eventually his reflective shield caves in and Ephraim collapses. Lance, finally understanding Arthur's signal, rushes over to collect him and Excalibur before sliding over to the hole in the floor. Below, Garp curses as he tries to acquire the means to hoist himself back up through the hole. Weighing his options, Lance decides that their chances are better against Garp than if they were to remain pinned by the suppressive fire. After converting the plasma disc into a shield, Lance slams down on top of Garp, leaving Ulysses to fend for himself upstairs. Back in the poker room, Percy's fears are confirmed as she spots Graham whispering into Shay's ear at the head table. Initially, Shay is the picture of indifference, but as the conversation goes on, he suddenly sits up straight, eyes following Graham's directions across the room until his gaze settles on Percy. Realizing they've been made, Percy quickly messages Merlin to have Arthur flip the silk switch, but their call for help is received a moment too late as Shay closes the distance between them. Percy attempts to feign nonchalance as Shay leans over her shoulder and, with a tone marked by familiarity, remarks that he thought she was dead. Merlin is stunned silent by the development and watches as Percy tries to recover, asserting that Shay's friendly demeanor doesn't align with his previous encounter with Silk in Tokyo. He shrugs off the accusation, noting that the bad blood was only because of a fallout between the Exchange and Chivalry is Dead at an organizational level, nothing personal. At this moment, Miss S, at Shay's prompting, reveals herself to be a representative of the Exchange. Displeased with her presence at the table, he tells her to shut up before turning his attention back to Percy. Percy doubles down on getting more information about Tokyo while stalling for Arthur, who eventually is able to slide into Merlin's comm link and access Percy's Skillsoft locally. Silk is suddenly wrested from sleep and wakes to find Shay gazing at her expectantly. She eventually catches on to the situation and tries to continue the line of questioning before Shay takes control of the conversation again. Getting down to business, Shay claims that there's an opening in his organization for someone with Silk's skills. She is flattered, but wary of the offer, and attempts to negotiate for a couple of weeks to decide and sort out her own personal affairs. Shay laughs, noting that Silk should know he doesn't like to be kept waiting, and that, with the R&D tech he gave her, she'd be an asset to him one way or another. Silk tries again to get control of the conversation, but fails as Shay tells Graham to usher Merlin and Miss S away from the table so that they can talk privately. Finally alone, Shay reveals his cards. The bird drones. It warns Silk that a revolution is coming that he doesn't want her to miss. Silk lets her mask slip and implores Shay to give her a week to handle her business. She expresses that something is missing that she needs to find. Shay picks up on the subtext, noting that he was a fan of Phoebe, but that Percy is nothing more than some rogue programming that stole his friend away. Silk rebuffs that assertion, surprising Shay with the news that Percy can use magic. Eventually, Shay caves in and promises Silk that she can have her week, but then she's on his payroll. Then, he leaves the table as swiftly as he arrived. At the table by herself, Arthur chimes into Percy's comlink to talk with Silk. He warns her that it is clear that Shay intends to kill Percy, who is the only one with a true link to Silk's past. If Shay can eliminate her, Arthur surmises that nothing will stop him from using her as a tool. At that moment, a message arrives from Graham. It reads, "Contract for indefinite retainer of services. Signing bonus, 15 million new yen." His point made, Arthur continues, sharing that he understands Shay wants to change the world. However, the difference between what he wants to build and what Arthur wants is that Shay will make slaves out of people to do it. Silk laughs at this, noting that Arthur talks a big game for someone who controls her with a remote. He disagrees, saying that Percy was in charge this time. Silk leans into this idea and offers Arthur a deal. She'll help him double-cross Shay if he gives Percy the only physical control switch for the Skillsoft. On the deck above, Lancelot finds himself toe-to-toe with Garp in some kind of unused game room on the bar level of the ship. Garp laughs, shouting that he has nothing against Lance personally, it's just that Ephraim pays his bills. In between punches, Lance attempts to win a second fight, won over Garp's loyalty. He claims that the Neon Knights can match his pay and that the work they would do would be better than working for Chivalry. Garp agrees, mid-uppercut, that Ephraim is an asshole and that he'd be happy to be rid of him. Lance pushes back, offering Garp a way off the boat when Chivalry is Dead inevitably blows it up. Garp's next hit whiffs off of Lance's shoulder and he stumbles, uncertain that Lance truly has somewhere safe they can go. As if in response, Lance knocks him to the ground and proclaims that their haven is called Avalon. After disarming Garp, the fight de-escalates. The mercenary agrees that he'll come along if they can match his pay and terminate his existing contract with Ephraim, Lance agrees to Garp's terms and without missing a beat, uses Hook and Eye's tool to grapple Ephraim's body and reel it down through the hole in the floor. Back in the executive suite, Ulysses is holding his own against Chivalry. Arthur tells Lance to lift his railgun rig through the hole so that he can back his grandfather up with more suppressive fire. Ulysses, however, makes quick work of the remaining Chivalry higher-ups and turns threateningly towards the last member. Before Arthur can respond, a voice reaches his ear from out of the Matrix noise, the voice of Snowblind. Feeling the static close in, Arthur quickly switches Percy back, shuts down Excalibur, and returns to meat space as Lance hurls Ephraim's lifeless body to the ground. Garp shrugs, remarking that he's now, suddenly, unemployed. Arthur shifts Excalibur back into his sword and crosses the room to block Ulysses. His grandfather glares at him, but Arthur draws the sword. He tells Ulysses to back off so that they can interrogate the remaining member of Chivalry is dead. Ulysses begins to exit with a huff, but turns back abruptly, telling Arthur that he did good. Arthur pauses to return the praise, only to find that Ulysses has disappeared. He turns to the remaining merc and asks if his cyberware feed is being backed up. The injured man laughs dryly and mocks Arthur. Arthur, already having the information he wanted, quickly drives Excalibur into the man's chest. As he falls to the ground, Arthur sends a sprite to follow the latest data backup, hopefully back to Chivalry's base. Now back in control, Percy retrieves Merlin from Graham and Schmidt. The two watch as they rejoin Shay's entourage and make their way out of the poker room into the bar. With Shay on the move, their operation continues. Join us next time for the recap of episodes 7 through 9. Until then, always remember, never forget, the birds work for the bourgeoisie.